I remember the exact quality of the silence in my life before Caroline. It was a comfortable, familiar silence, the kind you find in old libraries and ancient churches, a silence rich with the echoes of history. I was Patrick O'Malley, a librarian in Savannah, Georgia, a man who found solace in the musty smell of forgotten texts and the quiet rustle of turning pages. My world revolved around the whispers of the past, the untold stories locked within archives, and the comforting predictability of my own routine. I cherished my evenings, spent often in my armchair with a well-worn history book, or perhaps a local ghost story, the gas lamp on my desk casting a warm, buttery glow. I was content. I realize now, terribly, profoundly naive. My world was a mosaic of quiet joys, each piece meticulously placed. The slow southern drawl of the mornings, the way the light filtered through the live oaks, dappling the cobblestone streets. I knew the history of every square, every wrought iron gate, every colonial facade. It was my passion, my sanctuary. And then Caroline walked into that quiet world, a vibrant splash of color in a sepia-toned photograph. She was a tour guide, sharp and witty, with a laugh that tumbled out like wind chimes and a keen eye for the dramatic tales that made Savannah legendary. We met at a historical society meeting, both of us arguing passionately about the true origins of a particular antebellum mansion. I remember her eyes, bright and sparkling with intellectual fire, fixing on me as I quoted a forgotten deed from the county archives. She loved history, too, or so I thought. We bonded over ancient maps and forgotten lore, over the melancholic beauty of decaying architecture. She was everything I wasn't: vivacious, outgoing, effortlessly charming. She pulled me out of my shell, made me see the vibrant, living pulse beneath Savannah's historical veneer. I fell, deeply and completely, captivated by her energy, her apparent shared passion, her ability to make me feel seen and understood in a way no one ever had. Looking back, the early red flags were so faint, so easily dismissed. Her need for constant admiration, perhaps. A slight impatience with my slower, more contemplative pace. I remember once, early on, she'd laughed, a little too sharply, when I admitted I sometimes preferred the company of a good book to a bustling party. "Oh, Patrick," she'd said, with a playful pat on my arm, "you are such an old soul." It felt affectionate then, a charming quirk she indulged. Now I hear the dismissiveness, the faint edge of disdain. But then, I was blinded by the light she brought into my life. She became the vibrant, living chapter in my quiet historical narrative. We bought a charming little house in the historic district, our lives intertwining seamlessly, or so I believed. My days were still spent in the hush of the library, but my evenings were filled with her stories, her laughter, the delightful chaos she brought. The shift began subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a slow tide receding. Caroline, always ambitious, started expanding her tour business. She spoke of needing to offer more specialized, high-end experiences. That's when Dr. Julian Reed entered the picture. He was a visiting historian, a charismatic academic from a prestigious northern university, handsome in a tweed jacket and spectacles kind of way. He was researching Savannah's complex social history, and Caroline, with her extensive local knowledge, became his private guide. At first, I was proud. She was brilliant, after all, and Julian Reed was clearly impressed. She'd come home, buzzing with stories of their discussions, of the arcane historical points they'd debated, of the fascinating archives he was unearthing. "We're just two history buffs, Patrick," she'd say, all lit up, completely absorbed in the intellectual thrill. "He's such a fascinating mind, a true academic." I loved seeing her so animated, so passionate. It reinforced my belief that we shared this intellectual bond, this reverence for the past. I never suspected it was a pretense. But then the private tours became longer, more frequent. Her phone would buzz at odd hours, always a quick, dismissive glance at the screen before she'd text back. "Oh, just Julian with another historical query." I started to notice how much of her energy, her vibrant focus, was now directed elsewhere. The laughter she brought home wasn't for me. It was a lingering echo from her day with him. My quiet evenings, once filled with shared stories, became lonely. I'd sit with my books, but the words blurred. My stomach would tighten, a strange, unfamiliar knot of unease coiling there. Was I being too clingy? Too quiet? Was I not exciting enough for her intellectual needs? I tried to push the thoughts away. She loved history, and I loved history. This was just a professional engagement, an extension of her passion, something we shared, even if I wasn't physically present for the tours. But the nagging doubts grew louder. There were little things. Her perfume, a new one, lingering faintly when she came home late. A small, almost imperceptible distance in her gaze when I'd ask her about her day. Sometimes, when I'd try to engage her in one of my own historical discoveries, she'd listen with a distracted air, then swiftly change the subject back to Julian's latest theory or their plans for the next tour. "Oh, Patrick," she'd say, a touch of impatience in her voice, "you worry so much. He's a colleague. We're doing academic work. You know how much I cherish our shared passion for history." She made me feel foolish for even questioning it, for feeling a prickle of jealousy over a man who was, by her account, merely a fellow enthusiast. She had a way of making my concerns feel small, provincial, a testament to my own quiet, perhaps dull, existence. The psychological pressure mounted, subtle but insidious. She didn't have to say it outright, but I started to feel, instinctively, that I wasn't enough. That my simple love for old stories and quiet research wasn't intellectually stimulating enough for her. I started trying harder, forcing myself to be more outgoing, more engaged, even attempting to read some of the more abstract academic papers she mentioned Julian was working on. I wanted to be more exciting, more intellectually stimulating, but I only felt like a pale imitation of myself. I was losing myself, trying to mold into an image I thought she desired, an image that mirrored Julian Reed. Every time I brought up my feelings, my vague anxieties, she would soothe them away with a practiced ease, her voice gentle, almost chiding. "My dear," she'd say, taking my hand, "sometimes you can be a little predictable. It's what I love about you, of course. But Julian, he just brings out a different side of me, a more adventurous side, you know? It's purely academic." She smiled, a confident, reassuring smile, and I wanted so desperately to believe her. And so I did. I pushed my unease down, deep, deep inside, and tried to be the trusting, understanding husband I thought she needed. I tried to be less predictable. Then came the day. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because Tuesdays were usually quiet at the library. Caroline was complaining about the sheer volume of notes she had accumulated from her tours with Julian. She was planning a specialized tour package and needed to organize everything. Could I help her sort through some old documents in her antique writing desk? She'd asked, her voice light, innocent. Of course, I'd said, eager to be useful, to share in even this logistical aspect of her life. The desk was a beautiful mahogany piece, a family heirloom of hers, with intricate carvings and secret drawers she often boasted about. As I sifted through stacks of old pamphlets, research notes, and historical society newsletters, my fingers brushed against a faint ridge inside one of the larger drawers. Curious, I pressed, and a small, almost invisible compartment clicked open. Inside, nestled amongst dried lavender, were letters. Not one or two, but a thick bundle, tied with a silken ribbon. My heart gave a strange, sick lurch. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, and the handwriting was unmistakably Julian Reed's. My hands trembled as I pulled one out. It wasn't a historical query. It was a love letter. My eyes scanned the elegant script, each word a venomous dart piercing my heart. "My darling Caroline," he'd written. "Another week until we can truly be ourselves. I miss your intellect, your passion, your fire. Savannah feels dull without you beside me, deciphering its secrets, its hidden passages." The words blurred, then sharpened, focusing on phrases that seemed to leap from the page and strike me physically. Our dream home in Tuscany, away from the quiet monotony. His predictable librarian's life, no true passion, merely a fascination with dead things. My blood ran cold. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. I gripped the desk, my knuckles white, a wave of nausea washing over me. Predictable, dull, no true passion. It wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. It was a cruel, surgical dissection of my very being, my identity, everything I held dear, everything she had claimed to love about me. All the subtle jabs, the gentle chiding, the dismissive smiles, they coalesced into a monstrous, undeniable truth. It had been years. Years of lies. Years of a double life. All under the guise of shared intellectual interest. The plans for a second home, a life abroad, a future without me, a future planned while I was sitting alone in our home, believing her, trusting her, loving her. I heard the front door open, her light step in the hall. My breath hitched. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. She walked into the study, her smile bright, then saw me, frozen, the letters clutched in my hand, the hidden compartment gaping open. Her smile faltered, but only for a second. Her face remained composed, almost serene. Her eyes, those beautiful, sparkling eyes, met mine without a hint of fear or remorse. "Patrick," she said, her voice calm, devoid of any surprise or apology. "You found them." The world tilted. The beautiful mahogany desk, the familiar study, the very air around us. It all became alien, grotesque. I could only manage a choked whisper. "Years?" She sighed, a small, almost theatrical sigh, as if I were being inconvenient. "Yes, years. Julian and I, we have a connection. A deep, intellectual one. And more. You understand, don't you?" She needed more, she said. More intellectual excitement. More passion. She looked at me then, truly looked at me, and in her eyes I saw not affection, but a cold, clinical assessment. "You are a wonderful man, Patrick. Kind. Predictable. But I needed more. I needed someone who could truly challenge me, truly understand the depths of my ambition, my spirit. Someone who lives in the present, not just the past." The words, delivered so calmly, so rationally, were like shards of ice. My quiet trust, my gentle nature, my very love for history, the foundations of my being, were not just dismissed, but weaponized against me. The intellectual connection she'd claimed we shared, that beautiful, fragile bridge we'd built, was a mirage. She had used my own passions against me, twisting them into justifications for her betrayal. The air was sucked out of my lungs. I felt a visceral crack, like something precious and irreplaceable breaking inside my chest. I don't remember much of the next few days. There's a blur of numb movement, of a profound, suffocating silence that was far colder than any I'd ever known. My body felt heavy, disconnected from my mind. I barely ate, barely slept. The taste of ash was constantly in my mouth. My quiet, orderly world had imploded, leaving behind a crater of desolation. Every shared memory, every tender moment, every reassuring word she'd spoken, now replayed in my mind, twisted and poisoned by the truth. Her touch felt like a phantom burn, her laughter a mocking echo. I was living in a haunted house, haunted by the ghost of a love that had never truly existed. I retreated into myself, becoming a shadow in my own home. The library, once my sanctuary, felt like a mausoleum. How could I lose myself in the stories of the past when my own present was such a devastating lie? The realization that I had been so utterly, completely fooled, that my profound trust had been so casually exploited, was a humiliation that burned deeper than the heartbreak. It wasn't just losing her, it was losing myself, the self who had believed so implicitly, who had been so easily manipulated. But amidst the rubble, a flicker, tiny and hesitant, began to glow. Anger. Not a furious, raging inferno, but a quiet, steady burn. Anger at her. Yes, for her cruelty and deception, but also anger at myself, for my blindness, for my willingness to sacrifice my own intuition for the sake of a comfortable illusion. I had been predictable, yes, but I had also been faithful. I had been kind. These were not weaknesses, I slowly realized. They were parts of who I was, parts worth preserving. The first step was an act of pure, quiet will. I walked into a lawyer's office, my movements stiff, my voice flat, and filed for divorce. The practicalities were surreal, like navigating a dream. Each signature on the papers was a tearing sound, severing a tie that had long been rotten. I moved out of the house, leaving behind the shared memories, the tainted relics of a life that was never truly mine. I found a small apartment above a bookstore, just a few blocks from the library, a humble, quiet space. It was empty, devoid of Caroline's vibrant, destructive presence, and the emptiness, for the first time, felt like possibility rather than despair. I threw myself into work. The archives, once merely a source of information, became my anchor. I didn't just read, I absorbed. I burrowed myself into the narratives of the past, losing myself in the lives of forgotten Georgians, their triumphs and their heartbreaks. I saw echoes of my own pain in their stories, but also their resilience, their capacity to endure. The dust of old documents settled on my clothes, became a comforting shroud. I spent hours, days, weeks, poring over letters, diaries, ledgers, not searching for answers to my own questions, but for the universal human experience of pain and perseverance. And then, slowly, something shifted. I started seeing patterns, not just historical ones, but emotional ones. The way people rebuilt after loss, the quiet courage of ordinary lives. I began to imagine their internal worlds, their unspoken thoughts, their hidden narratives. One evening, after a particularly long day, instead of reaching for a familiar historical text, I picked up a blank notebook. The pen felt strange in my hand, heavy with unwritten words. I started to write. At first, it was just fragments, fleeting images, raw emotions spilling onto the page. Not my story, not directly, but thinly veiled versions of it. A colonial merchant betrayed by a rival. A plantation mistress discovering her husband's secret life. As I wrote, the characters began to breathe, their struggles mirroring my own, but from a safe distance. The process was agonizing, exhilarating, and deeply, profoundly cathartic. I wasn't just transcribing history. I was creating it, forging new realities from the embers of my own shattered one. The act of shaping a narrative, of controlling its outcome, of giving voice to the voiceless, became my refuge, my therapy, my rebirth. The words flowed, hesitant at first, then with increasing confidence. I wrote about the quiet strength of the overlooked, the power of resilience, the beauty of finding truth even in pain. My first novel, a historical fiction set in revolutionary Savannah, found a small publisher. It wasn't an overnight sensation, but it resonated. Readers connected with the quiet protagonist, a man of integrity who found his strength in the face of betrayal. Years have passed since Caroline's betrayal. I still live in that small apartment above the bookstore, surrounded by books that are now my companions, not just my work. I have become a respected local author, my books selling steadily, my quiet voice finding an audience. I've even given a few talks, something the old Patrick would have found unimaginable. My hands, once only skilled at turning pages, now craft intricate worlds, populated by characters who grapple with their own deceptions and discoveries. The scars are there, of course, etched deep within me. The memory of her calm, cold admission still sometimes resurfaces, a phantom ache in my chest. I have not sought another relationship. The trust, once so absolute, has been tempered by a wisdom born of fire. But I am not lonely. My life is rich, fulfilling, and authentically mine. The silence that surrounds me now is no longer the expectant silence of a man waiting for someone else to fill his world. It is the creative silence of a man building his own. I found my voice not in a partner, but in the pages of my own making, in the stories I now tell. The predictable librarian, as she once called me, became an author, a creator, a storyteller. I walked the cobblestone streets of Savannah, no longer just a custodian of its past, but a weaver of new narratives, embracing the quiet strength I found within the wreckage of a lie. The bitter taste of betrayal has faded, replaced by the sweet, enduring satisfaction of self-discovery.